This is number 5 for related rates AP review. Coffee pot has the shape of a cylinder with a radius of 5 inches as shown in the figure. Let h be the depth of the coffee in the pot, measured in inches where h is the function of time. The volume V is changing at a rate of negative 5 pi root h cubic inches per second. And the volume is given by V is equal to pi r squared h. Show that dHdt equals negative root h over 5. So one thing that we want to make sure that we're clear on is that if you look at the cylinder formula for volume, V equals pi r squared h, it resembles a lot like the cone, which is 1/3 pi r squared h. But the way that we deal with these volume equations from a related rates perspective is very different. The cone is going to require a little bit more work because the radius and the height are both changing, so we have to rely on similar triangles. But with cylinders, things get a little bit easier because if we think about the height and the radius over the course of time, as the water is either falling or rising, the h is changing over time, but not the radius. The radius of the water level is going to be, or the radius of the water is going to remain the constant 5 inches all the way, whether it's near empty or whether it's near full. So in that case, it makes the problem a little bit easier. That's just something to keep in mind with cylinders, is that your volume, your related rates will be a little bit easier because you can just replace that r with, in this case, 5, and we lose a variable and we just make it easier on ourselves moving forward. So the radius for the cylinder is a constant r value of 5. So at the very beginning, even before we find the derivative, we can just go ahead and replace that radius with a constant, because that radius of the water level is not changing over the course of time like cones are. So replace r with 5, we get 5 squared times pi, which is 25 pi h. So now we have a relatively simple, much easier path to our answer. We can now find the derivative with respect to time for both these variables, and there's no need for product rule, there's no need for similar triangles. So V becomes dV dt. 25 pi is a coefficient, it tags along to h's derivative, h becomes dH dt. And now we just put things in this place. We're looking for dV dt. We have dH dt. We have dV dt, which is negative 5 pi over root h. Negative 5 pi root h. So we can plug in negative 5 pi root h in for the dV dt, and now we can solve for dH dt. Okay. Divide both sides by 25 pi. The pi's cancel out. The 5 and 25 reduces to be negative 1/5, and then the root h is up top. So dH dt is simply negative root h over 5. Okay, part B. Given that h is equal to 17, at times t equals 0, solve the differential equation. So we're going to be cross-multiplying, separating variables, and then finding the antiderivative of both sides. So if I cross-multiply here, I get 5 dH equals negative root h dt. Anytime we see variables other than x and y, it will always be time and something else. So in this case, t is our independent variable, and our h is going to be what we're trying to get on the left side. So once I cross-multiply, I want to move that root h, negative root h, over to the left side. I'm going to move that 5 over to the right side, and now we have a clean separation of variables. H is on the left and everything else on the right. We can bring that root h up to the top, get it ready for power rule, and now we can take the antiderivative. So power rule for the h, which becomes negative h to the 1/2 over 1/2, because it's right now it's sitting at negative 1/2. So we add 1 to the exponent, and we get a positive 1/2. 1/5 integral of 1 becomes t. We have a plus c that shows up. Clean this up, we get negative 2 root h. So at this point in time, I'm going to go ahead and solve for c. So 0 plugs in for t, 17 plugs in for h. 1/5 times 0 is 0. I guess c equals negative 2 root 17. So now I'm going to put that value in for the c. So the next step, or the final step now, we have everything. We've found the antiderivative. We have our c value solved. Now we just have to try to get h by itself. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 2, which is the same thing as multiplying by negative 1/2. Distribute the negative 1/2 through. We get root h equals negative 1/10 t plus root 17. We square both sides, and we get h is equal to negative 1/10 t plus root 17 quantity squared. Okay, part C, at what time t is the coffee pot empty? Well, the coffee pot is going to be empty when the height is 0, when h is 0. So we can just simply replace h with 0 and look to solve for t. So I can square root both sides. I get negative 0 is equal to negative 1/10 t plus root 17. I can add 1/10 to both sides, divide both sides by 1/10 or multiply by 10. We get t is equal to 10 root 17.